I was resting at my estate in the Hudson Valley when the security alarm rang at 5 o'clock in the morning. The guard, Mr. Henderson, called me, sounding nervous. His daughter-in-law and his son had arrived with a team of movers. "They want you to leave, sir. They say this place belongs to them." I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey tea and smiled. "Let them pass, Mr. Henderson. They're about to discover what I did yesterday." Gratitude easily transforms into expectation, and from there, it's only a small step to entitlement. This bitter truth has been the most painful lesson of my 72 years. As I watched from my room's window, as 3 enormous moving trucks rolled through the main gates of my ranch, the Sunrise Estate, in the early dawn, I felt a strange calm. For 40 years, I had built this place stone by stone, turning what was once barren land into a 500-acre paradise overlooking a lake. It had stables, orchards, and a main house that exactly mirrored the vision I had held since day one. Now my daughter-in-law, Savannah, was coming to claim it as her own. My son, Ethan, followed her as always, a shadow without a will of his own, since they married 8 years ago. Welcome to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and gave my video a like. Now, let's jump into the story. I'm sure you'll enjoy it till the end. I took another sip of my chamomile tea, brewed especially by Mama Rose, who had worked for me for 30 years, while listening to the crunch of the gravel beneath the tires of the luxury SUV that pulled up in front of the house. I didn't bother to go out and meet them. I knew exactly how this scene would unfold and preferred to observe it from the dignity of my position. Loud knocks on the front door echoed through the house. Mama Rose looked at me with concern from the doorway of my room. "Mr. Eli, they want me to open the door for them." "Of course, Rose. He is my son, after all." The angry voices were not long in coming from the foyer. Savannah's heels struck the marble floor as if she intended to drill through it, approaching my room with military determination. "Mr. Brooks." Her voice feigned courtesy, but the contempt seeped out like dampness through old bricks. "What a surprise to find you here. We thought you would be in the city for your medical checkup." I turned slowly in my armchair to face her. Savannah, in her impeccable pantsuit despite the hour, her makeup perfect, and her glossy black hair, looked ready for a photo shoot, not a move-in. "Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, son." I greeted them calmly, noticing how Ethan avoided my gaze. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this early visit, complete with moving vans?" "It's not a visit, father-in-law," she replied, quickly abandoning the facade of cordiality. "We have come to take possession of what belongs to us. Ethan explained to me that this estate would eventually be his, and we've decided to move the process along." "Is that true, son?" I asked, directing the question straight to Ethan, who seemed to find the pattern of the Persian rug fascinating. "Dad, you always said everything you built would be for us someday," he finally mumbled. "With your current condition and the expansion of our operations, we thought it would be better if you took a break in the city. The DC penthouse has better medical facilities nearby." "I see," I replied, slowly rising from my armchair. "And my opinion on this moving the process along is irrelevant?" "Mr. Brooks," Savannah interrupted, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who believes she holds all of the winning cards. "Let's be practical. You are at an age where you require constant attention. This place is too isolated for someone with your limitations. Ethan and I can put it to better use. Plus, we've already started modernizing the estate's operations to integrate it into our hotel chain." "Interesting." I took a few steps toward the window, watching the movers start to unload boxes. "And I suppose you have documentation to support this transfer of property?" Savannah smiled with the self-satisfaction that I had always found particularly irritating in her. She pulled a folder of documents from her designer briefcase. "Of course. Here is the power of attorney you signed 2 years ago, giving Ethan authority to manage your properties in case of incapacitation. And here is the medical evaluation confirming your condition of moderate cognitive decline, which justifies activating said power. I took the documents and reviewed them carefully, nodding occasionally as if impressed. Very meticulous, all of this. There's just one small problem. Savannah's smile wavered slightly. Yes, these documents no longer have any legal validity. What do you mean? For the first time, I noticed a flicker of apprehension in her perfectly lined gaze. I mean, dear daughter-in-law, that yesterday I visited Mr. Alan Miller, the attorney who supposedly certified my cognitive decline. It turns out that good old Alan has an excellent memory and doesn't recall signing such an evaluation. In fact, he was quite disturbed to see that his signature had been so skillfully forged. Ethan visibly paled. Savannah maintained her composure, though I noticed her knuckles turning white as she gripped her briefcase. That's absurd. This document is perfectly in order. I also visited my primary care physician, Dr. Kenneth Hayes, who apparently signed this evaluation. Curiously, he also doesn't remember diagnosing me with cognitive decline. In fact, my last complete checkup 3 weeks ago shows I am in excellent condition for a man my age. I took a step toward my desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a folder similar to hers, but with the official notary seal clearly visible on the cover. What I did do yesterday, besides filing a police report for document forgery, was formally amend my will and revoke all previous powers of attorney. I also had a long conversation with my lawyer about the legal implications of attempting to appropriate private property through fraudulent documents. The silence that followed was so thick you could almost touch it. Mama Rose, who had witnessed the entire scene from the doorframe, retreated discreetly, though I could see the shadow of a smile on her wrinkled face. Dad, there must be a misunderstanding, Ethan finally began, finding his voice. We only wanted... A misunderstanding? I interrupted him, maintaining a calm tone that contrasted with the storm I felt inside. Is it a misunderstanding to forge signatures? Is it a misunderstanding to invent medical conditions? Is it a misunderstanding to arrive with moving trucks at dawn to expel your own father from his home? Mr. Brooks, Savannah interjected, trying to regain control of the situation. Clearly, there has been a communication error. Our intention was simply to help you transition to an environment more appropriate for your well-being. Spare me the explanations, Savannah. I've known you for 8 years, and in every one of them, you've demonstrated exactly who you are. What truly hurts me, I said, turning to my son, is seeing what you've become, Ethan. My son's face showed a mixture of shame and defiance that I had never seen before. It was like observing a stranger who coincidentally resembled the boy I had raised. I suggest you inform your moving team that there has been a misunderstanding, I continued. This estate remains mine, and will stay that way until I decide otherwise. And you can be sure that after what happened today, that decision has changed significantly. Are you threatening us? Savannah asked, regaining her usual aggressiveness. Not at all. I'm simply clarifying the current legal situation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a video conference in 20 minutes with my legal team to finalize some details regarding the new distribution of my assets. You're welcome to stay for breakfast if you like. Mama Rose makes exceptional smoked salmon and grits. I walked to my desk and sat down, effectively turning my back on them as I turned on my computer. In the reflection on the window, I saw Savannah clench her fists in frustration before turning on her heel and leaving the room. Ethan hesitated for a moment, opened his mouth as if to say something, but finally followed her in silence. From my window, I watched them argue heatedly next to their SUV before giving instructions to the confused movers. In less than 15 minutes, the trucks turned around and exited the way they had entered, followed by the SUV, which sped away, kicking up dust on the road. Only then did I allow the trembling in my hands to fully manifest, not from fear, but from a mixture of sorrow and contained rage that threatened to spill over. At what point had I lost my son so completely? How had I missed the signs? My name is Elijah Brooks. I was born in 1951 in a small town in rural Georgia, the son of a farmer and a schoolteacher who taught me that dignity is priceless and that honest work eventually bears fruit, even if the tree takes time to grow. With effort and determination, I managed to be the first in my family to attend college. I studied agricultural engineering at Tuskegee University, where I discovered my passion for sustainable agriculture long before it became a trend. I worked for years on government projects, learning the intricacies of bureaucracy, while dreaming of implementing my own ideas. At age 30, I risked all my savings to buy a piece of abandoned land in the Hudson Valley. My colleagues thought I had lost my mind. The place was eroded, lacked infrastructure, and was too far from traditionally productive areas. But I saw beyond its current state. I envisioned fruit trees, green fields, and eventually a business model that combined sustainable agriculture with exclusive rural tourism. My wife, Sharon, whom I had met during my university years, shared my vision, though not my unshakable optimism. It will take decades to make this place what you imagine, she told me as we walked the dusty ground for the first time. Then we'll start today, I replied. And that afternoon, we planted the first tree together, a heritage apple, which would eventually become the patriarch of our first commercial orchard. The first 10 years were brutally difficult. We lived in a small, simple house we built with the help of local workers. Every penny I earned as an agricultural consultant, I reinvested in the estate. We installed irrigation systems, improved the soil, strategically planted native trees to prevent erosion, and gradually, the Sunrise Estate began to flourish. Ethan was born during that period, in 1983. I remember holding him in my arms as I showed him the horizon from our hill. All this will be yours someday, I told the small bundle, who had barely opened his eyes. Not just the land, but the knowledge of how to care for it and make it prosper. As the estate grew, so did our family. Lauren was born 4 years after Ethan, completing what I considered my living legacy. I raised them among trees and crops, trying to transmit not only practical knowledge, but also fundamental values, respect for nature, perseverance, and the satisfaction of a job well done. The turning point for our business came when we began producing certified organic heirloom tomatoes and specialty greens at a time when international demand was taking off. Our sustainable methods and consistent quality won us contracts with premium exporters, and we soon expanded to other specialized products. At 50 years old, when many start thinking about retirement, I initiated the second phase of my plan, turning a portion of the estate into an exclusive ecotourism destination. We built luxury cabins, integrated into the landscape, a restaurant that utilized our own produce, and immersive experiences that allowed urban visitors to reconnect with nature without sacrificing comfort. The success of this model exceeded our expectations. Soon, the Sunrise Estate became a coveted destination for celebrities, executives looking to escape stress, and international visitors willing to pay premium rates for the authentic experience we offered. It was during this time of prosperity that the changes in my family began. Ethan, who had studied business administration at Georgetown University, showed less and less interest in the fundamental aspects of the business and more in the possibilities of rapid expansion and alliances with external investors. "Dad, you're thinking too small," he told me during one of our many arguments. "We could replicate this model in 10 different locations. Capital is available. We just need the vision to seize it." This place is what it is precisely because we don't treat it as a replicable model, I countered. Every tree, every stone has a story and a specific purpose. He would roll his eyes at what he called my rural romanticism. He failed to see that precisely that careful, personalized approach was what differentiated us in an increasingly saturated market. The situation became significantly complicated when Sharon received a degenerative disease diagnosis in 2013. The following 2 years were a whirlwind of treatments, specialists, and gradually fading hopes. During this painful period, Ethan assumed more responsibilities in the business, which I deeply appreciated, although I noticed that his decisions often contradicted our fundamental philosophy. Following Sharon's passing, I fell into a period of deep mourning. I immersed myself in the physical work of the estate, finding a certain solace in the predictable cycle of nature: sowing, growth, harvest, rest. Meanwhile, I delegated more administrative aspects to Ethan, who seemed eager to implement his modernization ideas. It was during this vulnerable period that Savannah came into our lives. He met her at a sustainable tourism conference in Miami, where she represented an international hotel chain interested in the green market. Intelligent, ambitious, and with impressive connections, Savannah initially seemed like a positive influence on my son, motivating him to think more strategically. However, I soon noticed subtle but significant changes. Ethan began talking about capitalizing on our brand and monetizing the authentic experience. And corporate language infiltrated conversations about what had always been a deeply personal project, rooted in family values. We need to standardize processes if we want to expand, he insisted during our monthly meetings. High-end clients expect consistency. What they expect is authenticity, I would reply. They don't want a standardized experience they could get at any 5-star resort. These philosophical differences deepened after his marriage to Savannah in 2015. The wedding, held at our estate, was an ostentatious event that had little to do with the values of simplicity and connection to nature we had cultivated for decades. Guests arriving in private helicopters carelessly trampled meticulously designed gardens, while climate-controlled tents and noisy generators temporarily transformed our sanctuary into something unrecognizable. It's just one day, my daughter, Lauren, tried to calm me when I expressed my discomfort. Let them enjoy it their way. But it wasn't just one day. It was a prelude to the direction the business would take under their combined influence. In the following years, I watched with growing concern as they implemented changes that fundamentally contradicted our original vision. Our sustainable agricultural production model was gradually relegated to a tourist attraction, while the cabins were renovated with unnecessary luxuries and prices that excluded the loyal clientele we had cultivated for years. More alarming still, they began acquiring nearby properties to expand what they now called the Sunrise Group, using considerable loans that jeopardized the financial stability we had worked so hard to build. When I expressed concerns, I was systematically ignored, or worse, treated with condescension. "The market has changed, Dad," Ethan would explain, with exaggerated patience. "We either adapt or we get left behind." "Not all change is progress," I would respond. "Not all progress requires abandoning fundamental principles." The tension reached a critical point when I discovered they had signed a preliminary contract to sell our organic orchards to a developer interested in building additional luxury villas. Lands we had nurtured for decades, which provided stable work for local families and produced some of the best organic produce in the state, would be converted into another generic experience for wealthy tourists. I confronted Ethan in his office, a modern addition to the estate that aggressively contrasted with the vernacular architecture we had carefully preserved. "This is unacceptable," I said, placing the contract on his glass desk. These lands have not only commercial value, but cultural and historical value to this community. Dad, we need to be practical, he replied without looking up from his computer. The margins on agricultural production are minimal compared to the real estate potential. It's simple math. Life isn't just math, son. There are commitments we've made to these lands, to the people who depend on them. Commitments you made, Savannah interjected, who had been silently observing from a sofa in the corner. Ethan and I have to think about the future, not sentimental promises from the past. That comment, delivered with the calculating coldness I had come to associate with her, perfectly crystallized the chasm that had opened between us. It wasn't simply a difference in business strategy, but a fundamental divergence in values and worldview. As the legal owner of these lands, I do not authorize this sale, I finally said. And until I see a significant change in the direction you are taking, I will reconsider my succession plan for the Sunrise Estate. The implied threat did not go unnoticed. Savannah narrowed her eyes while Ethan finally looked up from his screen to face me directly. Are you saying you would consider disinheriting us? He asked, incredulously. After everything we've done to modernize and grow what was essentially a family farm? I'm saying that I don't recognize the values guiding your decisions, and that my legacy is much more than properties and bank accounts. If you cannot respect that, then I must reconsider how to best protect what Sharon and I built. I left the office feeling simultaneously the weight of the confrontation and a certain relief at having finally expressed what I had been observing for years. However, I did not fully anticipate the reaction that would follow. In the subsequent weeks, I noticed unsettling subtle changes. Administrative staff, who had reported directly to me for years, began filtering my requests through appropriate channels according to a new policy. Operational decisions were made and implemented without my prior knowledge. Even Mama Rose, my trusted housekeeper, mentioned that Savannah had suggested that perhaps it was time for me to consider retiring to enjoy my family. Simultaneously, a more insidious campaign began. Important meetings were rescheduled without notifying me, making me seem forgetful when I mentioned the original dates. Documents I had reviewed appeared with changes I swore I hadn't authorized. My blood pressure medication, a controlled condition I had managed for years, suddenly seemed less effective, occasionally leaving me dizzy or confused during critical discussions. In retrospect, I should have recognized these tactics for what they were, a systematic attempt to undermine my authority and potentially my legal capacity to maintain control over my properties. But the idea that my own son would participate in such manipulation seemed so aberrant that I initially sought alternative explanations. It was Lauren, my daughter, who finally confirmed my suspicions during one of her rare visits from Chicago, where she worked as a researcher in sustainable agriculture. Dad, is there something you need to tell me? She asked, one afternoon as we walked through the orchards. Ethan and Savannah have been consulting with an attorney specializing in incapacity cases. They've mentioned to some mutual friends that they are concerned about your cognitive decline and the need to intervene before you make prejudicial decisions for the business. The revelation, though shocking, confirmed patterns I had been observing. With this new clarity, I began meticulously documenting every interaction, every decision, every inexplicable change in my routine or medication. I discreetly installed security cameras in my office and bedroom. I changed my routine, taking my medications only from bottles that I personally kept secure. I also began planning contingencies, consulting my own attorney in the city, someone with no prior connections to the family business. I reviewed options to protect both my personal autonomy and the legacy I had worked so hard to build. It was in the midst of these discreet preparations that I noticed the preparations for what Savannah called extensive modernization of the main house, architectural plans, material samples, and eventually communication about scheduled dates to begin significant renovations that would effectively displace me temporarily. We thought it would be more comfortable for you to stay in the DC penthouse during the work, Ethan mentioned casually during dinner. It will probably take several months, and the dust and noise wouldn't be good for your health. The penthouse in Washington, D.C., acquired years ago as a base of operations for business meetings, was luxurious but impersonal. More importantly, it would effectively isolate me from the estate and daily operations for a prolonged period. "That's very considerate of you," I replied with apparent gratitude. "When do you plan to start these renovations?" "The contractors arrive next week," Savannah intervened. "We've already selected all the materials and approved the final designs. You'll love the results, Mr. Brooks. The fact that such significant decisions about my main residence had been made without substantial consultation confirmed that the plan to marginalize me was moving faster than I had anticipated. It was time to accelerate my own preparations. The next day, claiming a routine medical appointment, I went to Washington, D.C. for a series of critical meetings, first with my primary care physician for a complete evaluation of my cognitive and physical state, then with the attorney, Mr. Alan Miller, to review and update essential legal documents, and finally, with my legal team to implement the protections I had been planning. I returned to the estate that same night, apparently without incident, but with the peace of mind of having established critical safeguards just in time. According to the security staff, Ethan and Savannah had left for DDC that morning for important meetings and would return the next day. I retired early to my room, savoring the peace of the estate I loved so much. From my window, I could see the orchards illuminated by the moon, the stables where we raised purebred horses, and beyond, the cabins where guests enjoyed the authentic experience we had carefully created for decades. How had we reached this point? At what moment had the legitimate desire for innovation transformed into greed, disconnected from fundamental values? And how had I failed to see the signs until the situation had deteriorated so dramatically? These questions accompanied me as I prepared for sleep, unaware that I would be abruptly awakened at 5 o'clock in the morning by the security alarm and a call that would confirm exactly how far my son and his wife were willing to go in their quest to seize control of my legacy. The sound of engines and voices outside confirmed that the confrontation had reached its critical point faster than I had anticipated. From my window, I watched Savannah direct the movers with impatient gestures, while Ethan remained in the SUV, seemingly busy on his phone. Mama Rose entered my room discreetly with a fresh cup of tea. "Mr. Eli, what should we do? Those men are unloading furniture as if they were the new owners." "Stay calm, Rose. This situation will be resolved soon. Please tell Mr. Henderson to let them in when they get to the front door." As I waited, I mentally reviewed every document I had signed the day before, every recorded conversation, every legal protection implemented. The anticipation was not fear, but a strange mixture of sadness and determination. What was about to happen would irrevocably change our family dynamic, but it was necessary to preserve something much more important than temporarily harmonious relationships. The confrontation in my room, though painful, had proceeded exactly as I anticipated. What Ethan and Savannah failed to understand was that their aggressive move, far from securing the control they sought, had precisely accelerated the scenario they were trying to prevent. After they left, with wounded dignity and frustrated plans, I went to my desk for a video call that, contrary to what I had hinted, was not with my legal team, but with Lauren, my daughter. "How did everything go?" she immediately asked. Her concern, evident even through the screen, found her in her lab in Chicago, surrounded by experimental plants that reflected her commitment to sustainable agricultural innovation. "Exactly as we expected," I replied, finally feeling the emotional weight of the confrontation. They arrived with moving trucks and forged documents, convinced they could simply take possession of the estate. And the documents you signed yesterday? All in order. The new will, the revocation of previous powers, the official medical evaluations, the forgery complaint, everything is ready. And the trust, I added. It's completely established and legally ironclad. The Sunrise Estate is no longer in my personal name, but protected by a structure that guarantees the continuity of our original vision, regardless of who tries to take control. Lauren nodded in approval, mixed with some sadness. I never thought we'd reach this point, Dad. I always believed Ethan would eventually understand the real value of what you built. I did too, daughter. But sometimes people choose paths that we cannot foresee or prevent. The important thing now is to protect the greater legacy, not just the lands and the business, but the principles that sustain them. When will you tell them about the complete restructuring? They'll probably try some other legal strategy in the coming days. When they do, I said, they will receive official notification about the new structure of ownership and governance of the estate. What Ethan and Savannah would eventually discover when they consulted official records or attempted new legal maneuvers was a fundamental transformation in the Sunrise Estate's ownership structure. The day before, I had legally transferred the entire estate and its associated operations into an irrevocable trust with multiple layers of protection. This trust, governed by a board that included Lauren, representatives from the local community, and experts in sustainable agriculture and responsible ecotourism, would ensure that the estate continued to operate according to the fundamental principles that had guided its development for 4 decades. I would maintain lifelong residency rights and active participation in operations, but the property itself was no longer subject to inheritance disputes or opportunistic manipulation. Ethan and Savannah would receive reasonable financial benefits as recognition for their legitimate contributions, but without the unilateral control they clearly sought. More importantly, the workers who had dedicated decades to the estate would have guaranteed job security. Community programs would continue, and the sustainable methods that had defined our operation would be contractually preserved. Do you think they will ever understand why this was necessary? Lauren asked, vocalizing the question that had been circling my mind. Perhaps eventually, or perhaps not. What I do know is that I did what was necessary to protect something bigger than egos or temporary ambitions. After ending the call, I went to the porch to watch the sunset over the fields I had cultivated with so much love for decades. The cool air of the Hudson Valley, laden with the scent of damp earth and wild flowers, reminded me why this place deserved protection. Difficult decisions often seem impossible until we recognize that the alternative, abandoning fundamental principles for temporary comfort, is the true impossibility for those who value integrity above superficially harmonious relationships. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and purple, I felt a strange peace. The morning's confrontation, though painful, had been necessary to catalyze the transformation that would preserve what was truly important, not just lands and buildings, but a vision, a set of values, a legacy that transcended individual ambitions. My daughter-in-law had knocked at 5 o'clock in the morning, demanding I leave, convinced this estate belonged to her by right. What she didn't know was that, thanks to what I did yesterday, the Sunrise Estate no longer belonged to any individual, but to the principles and the community that had made it prosper. A lesson she might understand someday, even if it came too late to mend the bridges burned by her own ambition. The official notification arrived exactly as I had anticipated, 3 days after the failed confrontation, when Ethan and Savannah had evidently consulted with their legal team about available alternatives. The messenger, a young man in a formal suit who clearly felt uncomfortable delivering documents amidst the vineyards where I was overseeing the seasonal pruning, handed me an envelope with the letterhead of Miller, Stone and Associates, a firm known for representing aggressive corporate clients. "Thank you, young man," I said calmly, signing the acknowledgement of receipt. "Would you like a glass of water or fresh juice before heading back? The road to the main highway is quite dusty this season." His expression of surprise at my serenity gave me some internal amusement. What did he expect? A trembling old man devastated by legal actions from his own son? "No, thank you, sir. I must continue with other deliveries." As his vehicle drove away, I meticulously opened the envelope. Its content was predictably hostile. A formal letter questioning the legal validity of my recent actions, alleging they had been carried out under undue influence and without full capacity, along with a barely veiled threat of extensive litigation if I did not reconsider the hasty decisions made during a period of emotional instability. The document concluded by offering an amicable resolution through a meeting with a mediator selected by them, where we could discuss a transition structure that respects your historical contributions while allowing necessary modernization under new generation leadership. The carefully calibrated terminology, combining barely disguised condescension with specific legal threats, clearly bore Savannah's trademark. I could perfectly imagine her dictating every calculated phrase, probably with Ethan silently nodding beside her. I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my shirt pocket as I continued supervising the pruning. The workers, many of whom had been with us for decades, continued to animatedly discuss the specific techniques developed for our high-altitude vineyards, apparently oblivious to the legal drama unfolding. Their profound knowledge, passed down through generations and complemented by carefully selected innovations, was precisely the kind of intangible value that Ethan and Savannah seemed incapable of recognizing, but which represented the true heart of the Sunrise estate. Back in the main house, I found Mama Rose preparing fresh lemonade in the kitchen, her expression revealing barely contained curiosity about the letter's content. "Bad news, Mr. Eli?" she finally asked, as she served me an iced glass. "Not exactly, Rose. Let's just say it's expected news," I replied, savoring the perfectly balanced acidic flavor with sweetness that only she could achieve. "Did the attorney, Mr. Velasquez, confirm his visit for this afternoon?" "Yes, sir. He said he would arrive around 4 o'clock, along with Ms. Torres, the accountant." "Excellent. Please prepare the small meeting room and something light to go with the coffee." While awaiting the arrival of my legal team, I reviewed again the complete documentation for the trust established days earlier. The structure, meticulously designed to balance patrimonial protection with responsible operational flexibility, represented the culmination of reflections developed during previous years, as I observed the worrying evolution in the values demonstrated by Ethan under Savannah's growing influence. The central element of the trust, fully implemented but not yet publicly communicated, was the irrevocable transfer of legal ownership of the entire estate to a structure governed by a specialized board. This board, strategically composed of Lauren, 3 veteran executives absolutely loyal to the original vision, 2 representatives from the local community, and an independent specialist in sustainable agriculture, would ensure operational continuity aligned with fundamental principles while allowing carefully evaluated innovations. Most importantly, from a personal perspective, was a specific provision granting me lifelong rights as founder guardian with special authority to veto decisions potentially contradictory to the essential values of the project. This position, legally protected against challenges based on mental capacity or age, guaranteed that as long as I lived, no radical reconfiguration could be implemented against the original principles. Ethan and Savannah, contrary to the impression they undoubtedly held currently, were not completely excluded from the new structure. The trust specifically assigned an executive position for Ethan within the tourism division, with appropriate compensation and minority participation in the governing board. However, crucially, this position required verifiable adherence to the established ethical and environmental alignments, with specific mechanisms for removal if fundamental principles were systematically violated. As I reviewed these details, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation experienced during recent weeks. The seemingly sophisticated conspiracy to declare me incapacitated had catapulted the implementation of protections that, honestly, I should have established years earlier when the first signs of fundamental divergence in values became evident. The discreet ringing of the front door announced the arrival of Mr. Rodrigo Velasquez, the attorney specializing in patrimonial trusts, and Ms. Mariana Torres, a forensic accountant with extensive experience in complex corporate structures. Both professionals, selected specifically for their unwavering integrity and complete disconnection from the social circles frequented by Ethan and Savannah, had been instrumental in the technical implementation of the complete restructuring. "Mr. Brooks," Rodrigo greeted me as we entered the meeting room. "I assume you received the anticipated communication from the opposing party." "Indeed," I replied, handing him the letter received hours earlier. "It has exactly the arguments and tone we anticipated." Mariana quickly reviewed the documents before smiling with an expression that combined professional amusement with barely contained indignation. It's fascinating how they attempt to characterize a structure meticulously implemented over months as a hasty decision during a period of instability. They clearly underestimate the extent of the preparation undertaken and the exhaustive documentation established precisely to counteract these specific allegations, Rodrigo added, opening his portfolio to extract a meticulously organized folder. The independent cognitive evaluations, multiple notarial certifications, professional testimonies, and, of course, clear evidence regarding the forged documents they previously attempted to use. Over the next hour, we methodically reviewed the official response strategy that would be delivered early tomorrow. The document, technically impeccable but humanly devastating, would not only categorically reject the allegations presented, but would clearly establish the potential consequences if they decided to escalate the legal confrontation. Full public exposure of the documented manipulation, potential criminal implications for forgery, and detailed revelation of the questionable maneuvers implemented during previous months. The letter concludes by offering a constructive alternative through acceptance of the structure already implemented, Rodrigo explained as we reviewed the final draft. It emphasizes the significant benefits for all parties involved, while unequivocally clarifying the fundamental irreversibility of the changes made. "Do you anticipate prolonged resistance?" I asked, considering the deep knowledge both professionals had of the personalities involved after months of preparation. Mariana and Rodrigo briefly exchanged glances before she replied with characteristic candor. "Based on analysis of prior behavior and discreet consultations with colleagues who know the recently hired legal representatives, we anticipate significant initial resistance followed by reluctant acceptance when they fully comprehend the legal strength of the established position." She paused momentarily before continuing. "However, the underlying family dynamic suggests a high probability of them continuing to seek alternatives to undermine the implemented structure, even if they initially feign strategic acceptance." Her evaluation, though painful from a personal perspective, aligned perfectly with the observations accumulated during recent years. The ambitions systematically demonstrated, combined with a documented willingness for ethical manipulation, strongly suggested that superficial acceptance would simply represent a tactical adaptation while they searched for potential vulnerabilities in the new structure. That is precisely why we implemented multiple, redundant protections, Rodrigo confirmed, anticipating my concern. Every aspect has been specifically designed to resist precisely the type of lateral attacks they will likely attempt eventually. As we concluded the meeting, and I escorted the visitors toward the exit, I simultaneously experienced deep sadness over the relational deterioration, evidenced and calm resolve about the actions implemented. The estate, fully visible from the main entrance during a particularly beautiful sunset, represented much more than a valuable property or a successful business. It embodied the physical materialization of fundamental values developed over an entire life. "What you've built here is truly extraordinary, Mr. Brooks," Mariana commented as she surveyed the impressive panorama of vineyards, orchards, and cabins perfectly integrated with the natural landscape. "I completely understand why it was so important to protect it appropriately." Her observation, though seemingly simple, perfectly crystallized the fundamental underlying motivation in recent actions. Protection of a legacy that completely transcended immediate personal considerations or traditional family relationships. As their vehicles disappeared down the country road, I experienced the deep certainty that the decisions implemented, though painful from an immediate relational perspective, represented the only viable path for the authentic preservation of the vision that had guided decades of consistent work. The response from Ethan and Savannah would arrive soon, catalyzing the next phase in a fundamental family transformation that, though unimaginable just months before, now represented an inevitable reality precisely because of the contradictory values systematically demonstrated through concrete actions. The response from Ethan and Savannah arrived faster than anticipated. The next morning, as I enjoyed a quiet breakfast on the terrace overlooking the lake, I heard the unmistakable sound of a helicopter approaching. The noise, completely discordant with the natural tranquility of the estate, announced a dramatic arrival that evidently intended to demonstrate power and urgency. Mama Rose appeared immediately, her expression torn between alarm and indignation. "Mr. Eli, it's a helicopter from the Sterling Group," she reported, referring to the hotel conglomerate owned by Savannah's father. "They are landing in the clearing next to the stables." "Thank you, Rose. Please prepare extra coffee and some snacks. It seems we'll have unexpected visitors." I continued quietly with my breakfast, while watching the spectacle unfolding in the distance. The helicopter landing in a barely adequate space, kicking up dust that surely irritated the purebred horses in the nearby stables. Savannah emerged first, immaculately dressed in an executive suit that contrasted absurdly with the rural setting, followed by Ethan and the two men in formal suits whom I recognized as prominent corporate attorneys. The specific choice of transport and companions communicated an intentional message. They wanted to present themselves as an imposing corporate force, not as relatives in a domestic dispute. This theatricality, although superficially impressive, revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the true nature of the conflict we faced. Mr. Henderson, the head of security, intercepted the group as they approached the main house. From my position, I could see the tense exchange, but not hear the exact words. Eventually, after a brief radio consultation, he allowed the group to proceed toward the main residence. As I heard footsteps approaching down the stone corridor, I took a final sip of coffee and prepared for the inevitable confrontation that would, in all likelihood, represent the last genuine exchange with a son I recognized less and less each day. "Good morning," I greeted them neutrally when the group appeared on the terrace. "I see you've opted for a dramatic entrance. Would you like some coffee?" Savannah, clearly irritated by the tranquil reception that contradicted her anticipated reaction, responded in a frosty tone, "This is not a social visit, Mr. Brooks. We have legal representation here to discuss the unacceptable maneuvers you have unilaterally implemented." "I understand the nature of your visit perfectly," I replied, pointing to the available chairs around the table. "However, important conversations deserve a civilized atmosphere. Please take a seat while Mama Rose brings refreshments." The attorneys, evidently uncomfortable with the unexpected dynamic, exchanged glances before accepting the invitation. Ethan, notably silent since his arrival, finally spoke as he took a seat opposite me. "Dad, We reviewed the documentation sent yesterday. What you've done is completely unacceptable and, frankly, surprising, considering the family values you always preached. The irony of the invocation of family values, precisely by those who had attempted systematic manipulation to declare me incapacitated, was almost painfully obvious. But I maintained a neutral expression as I replied, "Interesting observation, son. Though it curiously ignores the recent events where you attempted to declare me incapacitated through forged documentation while simultaneously planning an unauthorized move-in during my supposed medical absence." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by the second attorney, who apparently recognized the increasingly problematic legal ground. Perhaps we could constructively focus on potential modifications to the established trust that would balance the legitimate interests of all parties involved, he suggested with a clear conciliatory tone. The trust was meticulously structured precisely to balance multiple legitimate interests: sustainable operational continuity, preservation of employment for the local community, responsible innovation, and yes, appropriate family participation conditioned exclusively on the demonstration of compatible values. I responded, "However, I am open to hearing specific suggestions for potential refinements that preserve the fundamental integrity of the implemented structure." Over the subsequent hour, the discussion gradually evolved from initial hostile confrontation toward technical negotiation on specific aspects within the established framework. The attorneys, evidently recognizing the legal strength of the implemented position, progressively focused attention toward maximizing the benefits available within the existing structure, rather than fundamentally questioning the trust itself. Ethan and Savannah, initially united in shared indignation, gradually showed a subtle but significant divergence. While she maintained a primary focus on executive control and operational flexibility for implementing her modernizing vision, my son occasionally expressed genuine concern for the preservation of traditional elements that evidently maintained significant emotional resonance. This differentiation, although seemingly minor during the tense negotiation, potentially represented a crucial opportunity for limited but significant reconnection with a son who, beneath the transformative influence of a strategic marriage and corporate ambition, possibly retained a residual connection to the fundamental values instilled over decades. As the technical discussion continued between the attorneys regarding specific implementation details, I briefly exchanged a significant glance with Ethan, which communicated simultaneous shared sadness over the relational deterioration experienced and a tenuous possibility for partial reconstruction within fundamentally transformed parameters. The meeting eventually concluded with a commitment to continued technical discussions between the respective legal teams, while the fundamental structure of the trust remained unaltered. The reluctant but inevitable acceptance of the new reality represented a significant victory for the preservation of the true legacy that the Sunrise Estate represented. As I watched the helicopter rise again over the property, kicking up unnecessary dust and transiently disturbing the natural tranquility that defined the place's essence, I reflected on the truly transformative nature of recent events. The conflict, though painfully personal in immediate manifestation, fundamentally represented a clash between incompatible visions: rapid development focused on maximizing immediate financial profits versus patient cultivation of authentic value rooted in consistently applied sustainable principles. The implementation of the trust, though catapulted by specific family betrayal, represented the inevitable culmination of a divergence in values that had gradually developed over previous years. Viewed from a broad perspective, it represented a natural transition from an individual project toward an enduring institution specifically designed to transcend the inherent limitations in traditional family structures, which are frequently vulnerable precisely to the type of conflict experienced recently. As the sun reached its highest point over the Sunrise Estate, fully illuminating the extraordinary beauty methodically developed over decades of consistent work, I experienced simultaneous deep sadness over the significant relational cost and unshakable certainty about the fundamental necessity of the actions implemented. The subsequent months brought significant transformations both in the estate's operations and in the fundamentally reconfigured family dynamics. The complete implementation of the trust, initially resisted vehemently but eventually accepted as irrevocable reality, catalyzed an organizational evolution that surprisingly preserved valuable elements of both seemingly contradictory visions. The governing board, formally convened for the first time approximately 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, immediately established a balanced tone that would define subsequent administration. Deep respect for fundamental traditions, while simultaneously embracing carefully evaluated innovations genuinely aligned with the essential values of the project. Lauren, who had traveled from Chicago specifically for the inaugural session, perfectly articulated the guiding philosophy for future decisions. Our primary responsibility is to simultaneously honor the historical legacy and the future potential of the Sunrise Estate, recognizing that authentic sustainability requires both preservation and appropriate evolution. Ethan's position within the new structure gradually evolved in an unexpected but fundamentally positive way. Initially reluctant and visibly uncomfortable during meetings, he progressively demonstrated a genuine reconnection with operational aspects that evidently maintained genuine personal significance. The equine therapy programs implemented years ago, the specialized agricultural production meticulously developed over decades, the community relationships patiently cultivated with local populations. This reconnection, although initially limited to specific components clearly distanced from Savannah's direct influence, potentially represented the seed for partial but significant reconciliation within the parameters fundamentally transformed by recent events. Savannah predictably adapted her strategy with a pragmatism characterized by cold but effective calculation. Recognizing the practical infeasibility of prolonged legal confrontation against a meticulously ironclad structure, she progressively reoriented her attention toward maximizing the benefits available within the established framework, while simultaneously diversifying her personal investments into projects completely independent of the estate. Her gradual distancing, although never explicitly discussed during the limited interactions we maintained, potentially represented a positive development both for the operational integrity of the estate and for Ethan's personal evolution, as he occasionally demonstrated flashes of decisional independence previously suppressed during a marriage characterized by a fundamentally unbalanced power dynamic. One particularly significant afternoon, approximately 4 months after the complete implementation of the trust, I unexpectedly found Ethan in the old experimental vineyards where decades ago we had initiated the first trials of European varietals, specifically adapted for the region's unique microclimate. He was silently examining a drip irrigation system we had designed ourselves when limited resources prevented the acquisition of commercial equipment. "This setup is still surprisingly efficient," he commented when he noticed my presence. "The engineers I consulted recently confirmed that our original design maintains efficiency comparable to significantly more costly contemporary systems. Your mother always said that solutions born out of necessity frequently surpass those developed exclusively from abundance," I replied, recalling extensive conversations during the initial years when every investment required meticulous consideration and exhaustive justification. We shared a silent moment contemplating the perfectly aligned rows of vineyards that had evolved from a modest experiment into internationally recognized production, an appropriate metaphor for the complete transformation experienced by the estate over 4 decades. "I've been reviewing the historical files of the initial development," Ethan continued eventually. "The vision you implemented from the beginning was extraordinarily progressive for its time. Concepts we currently consider innovative, integral sustainability, productive circularity, authentic community integration, were present from the original planning, when they barely represented theoretical concepts in specialized literature." His observation apparently casual but laden with significant implications, potentially represented a belated but valuable recognition of the genuinely visionary foundations that had guided the project's complete development since initial conceptualization. Your mother brought crucial components that significantly refined the practical implementation, I replied, acknowledging her fundamental contribution, frequently underestimated in contemporary corporate narratives that privilege individual visibility over genuine collaboration. Her complementary perspective consistently balanced occasional excessive idealism with effective pragmatism, but never ethically compromised. The subsequent conversation, developed naturally as we toured the historical facilities, represented the most authentic exchange we had shared for previous years. Without Savannah's dominant presence, or the immediate pressures associated with tense negotiations, we gradually rediscovered a connection founded on a shared appreciation for a project that completely transcended immediate personal considerations. This limited but significant reconnection eventually catalyzed an unexpected collaboration when Ethan proposed the implementation of a specialized educational program utilizing the agricultural facilities as a living laboratory for university students interested in sustainable agriculture and responsible tourism. The Trust explicitly establishes an educational component as a fundamental element of the institutional mission, he explained during a formal presentation before the governing board. This program would represent the practical implementation of that commitment while simultaneously generating significant reputational benefits and potentially diversifying income sources through strategic academic partnerships. The proposal, technically sophisticated but genuinely aligned with the foundational values, was unanimously approved by the board, providing a significant opportunity for Ethan to demonstrate effective executive capacity within the parameters clearly established by the transformed organizational structure. During the subsequent implementation of the program, I observed a gradual but consistent progression toward a more balanced and potentially sustainable professional dynamic. Ethan demonstrated growing confidence implementing components aligned with the original vision while simultaneously contributing genuinely valuable, innovative perspectives within a clearly established framework of values. This personal evolution, although significantly different from the anticipated trajectory during previous decades, when we assumed a conventional generational transition through direct transfer of property and authority, potentially represented a healthier development both for Ethan and for the entire institution. The Trust, initially implemented as a defensive mechanism against opportunistic manipulation, progressively demonstrated transcendent institutional value through the establishment of a fundamentally more robust governance framework than traditional family structures, which are frequently vulnerable precisely to the value conflicts experienced recently. 6 months after complete implementation, during a modest celebration of the 35th anniversary of the first certified organic products commercially marketed internationally from the Sunrise Estate, Lauren perfectly captured the transformation experienced during a private conversation on the historic lookout point with a panoramic view of the entire property. The extraordinary thing, Dad, is that the structure implemented reactively as protection against a specific threat has evolved into an institutional model inherently more aligned with the fundamental mission than a traditional system ever would have allowed, she observed, as we contemplated the impressive panorama illuminated by a particularly beautiful sunset. The Sunrise Estate has effectively transcended the limitations inherent in projects defined exclusively by direct family connections. Her observation perfectly crystallized the fundamental lesson painfully distilled during the recent conflict. Truly significant legacy eventually requires institutional structures specifically designed to transcend the inevitable limitations associated with conventional generational transitions, particularly when fundamental values significantly diverge between successive generations. During the subsequent commemorative ceremony, I watched with quiet satisfaction the interaction between the diverse participants who collectively represented the project's complete evolution. Veteran workers who had contributed irreplaceable traditional knowledge for decades, young professionals providing contemporary technical perspectives, community representatives whose families had evolved simultaneously with the estate's development, and significantly, Ethan genuinely participating in substantive conversations about future developments, while Savannah maintained a discreet presence, but notably distanced from central operational discussions. This configuration, fundamentally different from traditional expectations about direct family continuity, but potentially more aligned with the authentic preservation of essential values, represented the tangible manifestation of institutional evolution painfully catapulted through recent conflict. As the sun gradually descended behind the surrounding mountains, tinting the sky with the golden and purple hues that had inspired the estate's original name decades ago, I experienced simultaneous calm acceptance of irreversible relational transformations and deep appreciation for the institutional resilience emerging through the new structure. My daughter-in-law had aggressively knocked on the door at sunrise, arrogantly convinced that opportunistic manipulation would guarantee complete control over the legacy meticulously built over 4 decades of consistent work. Her action, although fundamentally destructive relationally, had catapulted the implementation of institutional protections that would paradoxically significantly strengthen the project's fundamental sustainability, while simultaneously creating potential space for partial but authentic reconciliation within transformed parameters. What Savannah didn't know that fateful morning, when the moving trucks awaited instructions while she imperiously demanded my immediate departure, was that the actions discreetly implemented the day before did not merely represent a defensive maneuver against an immediate threat, but the inevitable culmination of reflections developed over previous years about the true nature of significant legacy. The estate, now contemplated during a symbolically appropriate sunset, while the celebration continued discreetly in the main facilities, had finally evolved from a personal project into a genuinely sustainable institution, specifically designed to preserve fundamental values while simultaneously embracing appropriate evolutions over subsequent generations. This transformation, though painfully catapulted by specific family betrayal, paradoxically represented the most authentic manifestation of the original vision that conventional continuity through direct succession never would have guaranteed. As stars gradually began to appear over the Hudson Valley, I recalled a conversation with Sharon decades ago during the initial development phases, when limited resources and seemingly insurmountable obstacles frequently threatened the project's complete viability. The truly valuable thing she had observed while we manually planted the first trees in the then barren earth never truly belongs to a specific individual, but to the values that completely transcend temporary personal possession. Our real job is to cultivate something that will eventually belong fundamentally to itself. That seemingly philosophical observation during intensely demanding practical implementation had perfectly crystallized through recent events into a fundamental truth. Authentic legacy inevitably transcends conventional family relationships, finally manifesting through institutional structures, specifically designed to preserve essential values while appropriately evolving over successive generations. The Sunrise Estate, originally named for the daily moment when new possibilities emerge as darkness gradually recedes, had experienced a genuine institutional rebirth through painful but clarifying conflict. The new structure, although fundamentally different from traditional expectations about direct family continuity, paradoxically represented the most authentic preservation of the original vision that conventional transfer to biological heirs never would have guaranteed. As I quietly returned to the main house, where the celebration continued discreetly, among the diverse participants collectively representing the estate's complete evolution over 4 decades, I experienced the unshakable certainty that the decisions implemented, though painfully necessary from an immediate relational perspective, represented the most authentic manifestation of fundamental responsibility toward a project that had defined an entire life. The effective protection of essential values, while simultaneously allowing genuinely aligned evolutions over subsequent generations. My daughter-in-law aggressively knocked on the door at sunrise, demanding immediate ownership of the legacy patiently built over decades. What she didn't anticipate was that the actions discreetly implemented the day before would guarantee precisely that the Sunrise Estate would never fundamentally belong to a specific individual, but to the essential values that had catalyzed its original creation and would guide its future evolution over subsequent generations. The truth, finally distilled through painful but clarifying conflict, is that truly significant legacy never fundamentally consists of the material transfer of specific possessions, but in the effective preservation of essential values, tangibly manifested through institutional structures specifically designed to transcend the limitations inevitably associated with temporary personal relationships. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.